First of all, thank you all. Thank Nick Turner and Karen and Danya Perry and Mylan Dennerstein and everybody at Vera. This is, for me, an extraordinary honor. Also, having been trained by two Cuomos, I would be remiss if I did not point out the various elected officials and other high office holders in the audience. So please let us all thank Maria Vullo, the Superintendent of the Department of Financial Services, Benjamin Lawsky, her predecessor in that office, Chairman Bill Thompson of that great institution, the City University of New York, our City Comptroller, Scott Stringer, Zach Carter, our Corp Counsel, was here. We have a governor who will be up shortly, who I just learned that you all now know that I threatened his chief of staff. And it's an odd thing because, look, if it works, you do it. I actually have a connection to two of the other honorees tonight. We've now learned that I have this odd connection to the governor of Connecticut. And by the way, he was originally above me on the bill. And then he announced that he wasn't running for re-election, and Danya convinced you guys to drop him down and move me up. So thank you, Danya. It's the power of being a lame duck. And Vanita is here, who really has had an extraordinary career that I often take credit for. Vanita and I met when I was a hiring partner at a law firm. And she met with me. She was at law school. I think she was a 2L at the time. And I said to her, why do you want to be an associate at a law firm? That's a big mistake for you. And she ended up not being an associate at a law firm, so I now take credit for everything she's accomplished since then. So thank you for heeding my words of advice. This is an odd experience for me being up here because, and I say this in all seriousness, I not only don't deserve this award, I don't know what I'm doing here. This organization, Vera, is an extraordinary organization. And the first time I heard about Vera was when I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office working with Liz Glazer, who I'm not sure if she's here tonight, but Liz and I have worked together like I've worked with Karen and Sam and many of these great lawyers that came out of the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we worked as prosecutors together. And Liz was the first person who said to me in that office, as we convicted people and did things that not only were important, but they seemed important beyond what they were. We were doing, oftentimes run-of-the-mill cases, and in truth, in hindsight, my great victories as a federal prosecutor were wonderful. They were a wonderful learning experience for me. But as Liz pointed out when I was there, that doesn't really solve the problem. That is a retail response to a much broader social problem. And as we were doing gang cases, it was Liz who said, there are people like the folks at Vera who look at these problems systemically, what the effect is on society. And the key isn't ripping out the gang by its roots. The key is understanding what happens when those people get pulled out, what you do for those people that you've now incarcerated, but also what you have done for that community that's left behind. And that was the first time I really understood that what we were doing in a way was important, but it was only part of the story. And I've always tried to remember that. And Karen managed to highlight something that frankly, I remember all the time, or I try to remember all the time, which is in my professional life, I truly believe that there are only two things that I've ever worked on and accomplished that had real significance. And I've done a lot of things, but in many instances as a lawyer, those things that I did, I was fungible. I could have been replaced. And one was marriage equality, which in many ways is a wonderful story how we passed this legislation. But my role in that was not being somebody who appealed to people's better angels. My role in that was convincing the Senate Republicans in Albany to let the legislation go to the floor of the Senate and be voted on. And I didn't do that by being a nice, thoughtful guy. I did that by uttering phrases like, "We have two speeds around here, get along or kill." Not my proudest moment, but again, it was effective. And the other case I worked on, which, you know, in all candor, it sort of fell on top of me and I couldn't get it off, was the representation of two men, David Lemus and Olmedo Hidalgo, who I, along with a small group of people, including an unbelievable detective named Bobby Adelorado, and Dateline NBC producer Dan Slepian, and we became convinced to a certainty that these two men who were in jail had been convicted by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office were innocent. It's not that they needed a new trial. It's not that there was a defect in the conviction. These men were innocent. And I really believed at the time that I would get together with my former colleagues from the Manhattan DA's office, explain the situation, and the jailhouse doors would open. And it was an eye-opening experience for me to realize it just wasn't going to work that way. But the most interesting person I met in that case, and there were a lot of great people who helped along the way, but the most interesting person was a guy named Thomas Spanky Morales. And Morales, we learned early on, was the actual shooter. It was Morales that was responsible for the murder. And not only was Morales responsible for the murder, in an odd, ironic twist, I had previously prosecuted Morales. And so Morales was in jail on a conviction I had obtained earlier. Before that, he had done this shooting at the Palladium nightclub. And it's a long, convoluted story that I'm happy to tell anybody, and frankly, I'll bore you to death telling it, and it'll take an hour. But along the way, the issue of Morales' role in all of this became critical, and ultimately, Morales was charged by the Manhattan DA's office, who now conceded he was part of the crime, but said he did it along with the two men who were in jail, even though none of them knew each other. And through a weird twist in New York law, Morales' case was dismissed on a Singer motion, for those of you who practice in the area. And as we were going to the trial on David Lemus, his conviction was vacated. One of us had the bright idea, I was by then in the AG's office, but still advising on the case, hey, maybe we could get Tommy Morales, the shooter, to testify. And it seemed like a crazy idea. I mean, this was a guy who had already been convicted 3 or 4 times, who had participated in about a dozen murders. And he looked like he came from Central Casting. If you were to pick a guy to play the role of the guy who did the murder, it was Tommy Spanky Morales. And ultimately, Morales agreed to testify. And he did in a closed courtroom, and he didn't say he did the shooting, but he said he was there, and he said he knew all about it, and he said that the man on trial didn't do it. And it's one of the reasons why David Lemus was acquitted. And afterwards, we talked to Tommy Morales. And it was an odd conversation, you can imagine. This guy was on the opposite end of, you know, most of what I had done in my professional life up till then. And I asked him, why? Like, why did he agree to testify? And Morales said that he hadn't done a lot of good things in his life, and most mistakes he made were the wrong ones. He said he'd spent a lot of time in jail, and that he knew he was in jail for things he had done, and that it was still torture being there. And he said he couldn't imagine what it would be like to be in jail for something he didn't do. And he said, so for once in his life, and maybe only once, and he was very candid about it, he said he was going to do the right thing. Now, I think a lot about Tommy Morales, because so much of what we all do is important, and it's significant, but not in the profound kind of way that Tommy Morales' willingness to come forward and testify was. And all of you here tonight, and in particular, those of you from law firms who I work with, my friends from the office, that you would give of your time, that you would be willing to financially support this organization and heed the calls of Nick and Danya Perry and Karen and everybody else that's involved with this organization. you're doing something that is profound by helping Vera. And I just want to say, I don't really deserve this award, but I'm thankful that I could play some kind of role in supporting and helping to advance the great work that this institution does. So thank you all, and thank you, Nick.